serious? Former cult members or friends of cult members of Reddit, what is your creepiest, scariest or most disturbing story, and is that what made you leave? Former member. Here. One day, the morning of going to said cult, my mother woke me up and tried to force dress me since I didn't feel like going. I had only gotten a few hours of sleep the night before, and I also felt slightly ill, like I had a cold. So I really wanted to stay home. After a few minutes of struggling to put ugly clothes on me, she gave up and slapped me approximately 7 times. Tried to choke me, then shoved me off the bed onto the floor. She screamed at me that I would be in trouble for this rebellion and left for the cult meeting. That's when I finally decided I had enough and decided to leave it permanently. I had already been thinking about leaving, but this was just the final nail in the coffin. Later on, she got me a therapist for the purposes of trying to make me go to their cult meetings, crying that there was something wrong with her daughter. Lucky me. The therapist sided against her and told her to stop forcing me to go. Thankfully, she never did it again, though she lamented about me not believing anymore. This was about 7 years ago, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. In a way, it was sort of a good thing, because it opened my eyes to the world. Thank you for reading. A friend of mine accidentally got involved with a cult in Iowa. He thought it was just a really close-knit church, but eventually snapped that something wasn't right. He moved to Texas for work pretty shortly afterwards, and after about a week of being here, someone knocked on the door. It was one of the members. She came here to try and talk him into going back, and progressively became more and more emotional. They ended up having to call the cops to have her removed from the property. I was best friends with an Olympic athlete who was into Scientology. Due to his semi-fame, he was given the VIP treatment at their Hollywood Celebrity Center, where I often accompanied him. I sat in the waiting room with the likes of Lisa Marie Presley and Giovanni Ribisi while he did his auditing sessions. When he introduced me to John Travolta at one of their celebrity events, Travolta wrapped me in a bear hug and lifted me off the ground. My friend convinced me to leave my day job and work as his personal assistant. He was doing a lot of corporate speaking appearances. I moved into his house and we lived like brothers. Swimming in his pool, going to strip clubs, working out at his training gym. I had some amazing experiences, like going backstage at the American Music Awards and hanging out alone with Guns N' Roses for 2 hours. The church's publicity team wanted to set him up with a girlfriend. They set up a series of dates with very cute Scientologists, but nothing really took off. We had a lot of philosophical discussions. I found many of Scientology's aspects to be very insightful, but the money grubbing and the xeno business kept me too skeptical to fall in. At one point, he made an anti-gay argument, basically saying, imagine carrying that to the extreme. We'd all die off. Things got creepy when he started asking me for up-downs after his workouts. Then one night inviting me to masturbate with him. I passed. Then at a party he propositioned my gay cousin, who immediately told me, obviously I have nothing against gays, but I felt very creeped out. He was behind on paying me because he had run up huge debts for services at the church. I left and we haven't spoken since. I feel like I got closer to the inside of Scientology than any non-Scientologist ever has. I think I have a pretty good idea of what's going on with Tom Cruise. You know? My 2 best friends are ex-Jehovah's and one of my former best friends still is. One of my friend's older siblings were abused by members of the cult. When they told the elders, they tried to cover it up. My friend and his family were later kicked out, which means that aren't allowed to talk to some of their own family members that are still Jehovah's. Similar thing happened to my other best friend, but not to the same degree. The former friend and me used to be extremely close between the ages of 6-11. At 11 my family moved to another country for 3 years. When we came back he had stopped hanging out with my old clique of people, whom I stayed in contact with. Now to the ducked up thing. I was at a grocery store with one of my ex-Jehovah friends. He was never baptized and therefore can't be kicked from the cult. This means that he can still talk to members. We bump into my ex-friend's mom and he says hi and they talk for a while. During all this time, the mother doesn't talk to me at all, or even acknowledge that I'm there. She also hides from my mum if they happen to be in the same place. I assume that it's because she realized that she's not going to be able to recruit us into her ducked up cult. The ex-friend is and has always been very sheltered and all he knows is Jehovah. Which is a shame seeing as he is incredibly clever and the cult limits his options greatly. When we were small he wasn't allowed to be in the re-classes with us because of his religion. TL. Dr. Jehovah's is a ducked up cult. An old friend of mine is part of the Growing in Grace cult. She has a 666 tattooed on her arm and believes their leader is Jesus' second coming. He's dead now but his followers insist he isn't. The guy was a hustler and a liar and ducked every pretty follower he encountered despite being married. My friend met him once but told me she was sad cause he didn't ask her to come back to his room. She really wanted to duck him to be near his divinity as she puts it. The guy was gross and like 30 years her senior. Former member here. I was a part of a Christian cult. They referred to it as a discipleship program. Whenever we did something wrong, they made us work out as form of punishment. The year I was in there, I made a new friend in the program cult. He was a chain smoker. About 7 months into the year, he got caught smoking. They confronted him about it and first, they woke him up at around 5 AM to run. Later on in the day one of the leaders there took him to an abandoned prison and made him run around it several times, amounting up to about 6-8 miles of running. All this happened because he got caught smoking a single cigarette. While this may not be the most disturbing story, it's the story I tell to give people an idea of how ridiculously strict this place was. Edit. I told my chain smoker friend about this Reddit post and he did his own write-up on Imgur. I'm the friend in his story. If anyone would like to read his side of the story, here it is, imgur.com. I used to know the son of a Scientologist. He went to the church located in Washington, D.C. Apparently they dabble in a lot of authoritative hypnosis of which he picked up on and ran from home. When I hung out with him, his parents once tried to take me to meet what's known as an auditor. Nope. 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 I don't know if it was a cult or not, but I grew up in a church group that was pretty close if not. My creepiest story is this. A big church that read, controlled by fear. A lot of little churches ran a college, read, unaccredited brainwashing for all the little churches kids so we didn't have to go to secular school which was pretty much considered the devil. The pastor of that big church was almost worshipped. Everyone loved him and gave him free reign to tell them what to do with their lives. I went to this college because there was really no other acceptable choice when my family was in this group. Between my freshman and sophomore year there, this pastor was convicted of having sex with a teen girl he was counseling and of taking her across state lines. etc. He was later sentenced to 12 years in prison. The creepy factor is, I know for a fact that this man had keys to every door on campus and he was known to make surprise visits to the girls' dormitories. Meaning, this convicted predator had a key to my room and no one dared question him on anything. My family had been slowly on their way out for years. But this situation was the straw that broke the camel's back. I grew up in your basic non-denominational Christian household. Both parents being devout but not overly obsessive. So this is where things took a turn. My dad brought my older brother and I to this evening church service at a new location. I remember thinking it odd, even at the age of 7, that this church was being held in a dimly lit single-floor office complex. On arrival, my father brought us forward to meet the pastor and have him pray over us. This man stood over my brother and I, laid his hands on our head, and starting speaking in tongues. I know some sects of Christianity do this, yet, while he would do so, the whole room of men and women began to do the same. Some falling on the floor in seizure-like fits. When this pastor finished his chanting, he spoke to my father and told him that he saw our future from God and if we remained loyal, we could do whatever we wished. He then condemned us from having any toys because now that we have been seen by God, the devil would use our toys to carry demons. That night my dad threw most all of our toys away and told us how he saw a man's face turn lizard-like that night, and we must rid ourselves of demons. The only thing that saved my brother and I from going back was my mother hearing this and forbidding us from visiting it ever again. Though my parents separated, I do believe my father returned numerous times to this church, yet he now lives in a home doped up on many mind-numbing medications. I worked for a cult. It was a private school for rich kids who had addictions. There was a dynamic leader who had an inner circle of young boys who he doted on. The school itself was somewhat abusive, and trained staff like myself administering meds, and when I started, I was able to administer PRN Thorazine. As a staff member, I had to live like the students, adhere to the same rules and regs. Then they worked to distance me from my family, telling me I had an addiction. I didn't, and that it was dangerous for me to use my time off to see my family. I walked away after a few weeks because I thought I was too weak to work there. Then I went back and realized what a terrible place it was. Finally left, with a brand new eating disorder I had managed to avoid during my own adolescence. The school shut down eventually due to lawsuits from parents. The former students have a FB page, and from what I can tell, many struggle with the systematic abuse they experienced. The leader has since died, and turned out all his degrees and awards were faked. It taught me a lot about safety and services for vulnerable people. The scariest moment was the student who was actively psychotic and should have been in a lockdown facility but who was still with us. I was told to restrain him even though he wasn't fighting. He was on a hunger strike and refused to leave the building for a meeting. I had to carry him to the meeting, then restrain him the whole time. I went to a non-denominational church for a very short period of time that I believe was a cult. In the back of the church there was a small hallway behind the altar. On one wall there was a low bookshelf that was full of Benny Hinn videos. In the middle of the hallway there was a smaller hallway that led up to 2 bathrooms on the left and a little room on the right, probably used for Bible study or whatever else. I was back there in that hallway one night and the bathroom door was open with the light off. It contained a light bulb that hung from the ceiling. I kid you not. That thing flickered on by itself. That's probably the creepiest thing I saw while there. I only went a few times but it was pretty messed up. They said I had demons oppressing me and living inside my body. I had to get counseling from several different church ministers afterward just to deal with that. Plus there was this pressure to get people to join the church and weird dream stories people had all of the time. I remember walking in one day and seeing a chalkboard and written on it was, "Friends don't let friend go to hell." I also remember one person talking about how they had a dream that everywhere around the town that we lived in it was demons fighting and torturing people, and how the only peace could be found inside the walls of the church. The worst sin according to them was speaking against charismatic gifts or miracles. Even joking about that sort of thing, such as playfully touching someone on the head and saying, "Be healed," put you in danger of blaspheming the Holy Spirit. Basically, if you said that any of the tongues or healings they did wasn't real or made fun of it, you were going to hell. Yeah, it was seriously weird. I left after only a few visits, so it wasn't that hard for me to leave. I left because I realized they had very bad theology mixed with ignorance and probably didn't know what they were really doing. In college, I got involved in a Christian campus ministry my freshman year. My junior year I decided I was agnostic and left the ministry. About 6 months later, I started dating this girl. One day, about 2 months into our relationship, she comes over in tears. Turns out one of the staff members of this ministry had sought her out and told her a bunch of bullshit about how I'm not a good guy, how I don't treat women with respect, and that she should be really careful around me. This girl wasn't involved with any Christian organization and was agnostic like me. They literally had to stalk my Facebook account, find out who she was, then somehow ran into her at a coffee shop. She was more distraught that someone had basically stalked her and didn't believe the stuff they said for a second. They'd done stuff like this before too. The Marsum ducking Pisces. Anyone remember the family radio group from a couple years back? I left because I woke up on the 22nd of May. Slowly piece my life back together. I don't think there's a lot of creepiness that happened, but mostly disturbing events. When you're raising children to believe they've been born to die and their only purpose is to get the word out, everyone's in for a ducked up ride. Very fundamental church. More extreme than most. I got my FRST clue at a women's gathering when we were passing out snacks and a grown woman said to me, "Oh no. My husband doesn't allow me to eat potato chips." Allow? Interesting. I got more and more clues as I was there. People upset with me for reading liberal magazines, which was Reader's Digest. Then I was shunned for using worldly means for trying to lose some weight and using a diet drink mix. I was told I should be praying about it and more faith. The kicker was when the pastor's wife told me that she could tell every day where I was in my walk with Jesus spiritually, because of how much makeup I was wearing that day. Yup. Time to go. My grandfather was a French-Canadian Catholic. He had two brothers. One of them married a Jehovah's Witness and converted. They took it all very seriously when my mom was young. They itched her out for sending a Christmas card. This would have been in the late 50s or 60s. Despite this, my grandpa still kept in touch cause it was his brother. Even after my mom's family emigrated to the US, he went to visit them up on their farm in Canada at one point. That's when it happened. There was a farming accident involving his brother. A bad one. My grandpa made sure he got to a hospital. Upon his arrival, the doctors determined that he needed both an amputation and a blood transfusion. At this point, the brother is unconscious. The brother's wife and kids weren't there, they'd gone into town. And this was well before cell phones. It was up to my grandpa to make the call. Without hesitation, he told them to do it. His brother lived. That whole branch never talked to him again. I'm pretty sure there was never a reconciliation. My parents thought about being super fundamentalist Christians at one point. So they went to some seminars by Bill Goddard, I think that was his name. Not exactly a cult, but they are super conservative fundamentalists who believe in homeschooling kids and shit. I remember thinking it was really ducking weird because in the kids program they made people raise their hands a certain way. You had to raise one hand while supporting it with the other hand. So one hand is up vertically and you had to hold the other hand horizontally under it to support it and make an L shape basically. As a normal kid who went to school with normal people, I thought this looked retarded. That's when I knew something about that place was not right. Got involved with Scientology. Weirdest thing with me was that no matter what you did or said, you were wrong. I got harassed by the Masked for Money. They came to my house. Followed me everywhere I went, even school. They'd just sit in the back of the lecture hall. And they videotaped me once when I was starting to back out of the religion. Edit. What I described is what they call fair game. I'm a Southern Baptist, which is by no means a cult. But there are some churches that can definitely do some cult-y things. Once at Bible camp, they showed us a documentary about how Satan can more easily overtake people who listen to secular music, making them more likely to go to hell. Afterward, there was a giant bonfire and the kids were encouraged to throw their secular CDs into it. Another time there was a sick little boy who was getting a heart transplant. So they brought him up to the front of the church. The pastor had olive oil in a fancy little bottle and poured it all over the poor kid's head while the elders put their hands on him and smeared it on his forehead and cheek. I was 14 or so at the time and remember with panic thinking, oh geez, is this a cult? Pretty sure this is something a cult would do. This is probably too late to get noticed. But whatever. I used to go to a super tiny, about 100 kids K-12, Catholic school. I put Catholic in quotes. Because they technically weren't allowed to call themselves Catholic. Because the Catholic Church thought the guy who ran it was a loose cannon. Spoilers, he was. So, they said that they were a school that taught Catholic theology. It was basically a cult. We even sometimes had prophets that were friends of the principals come and tell us about their visions. Remember the swine flu? Yeah. According to one of those guys that was going to kill a third of us all off. Q-typical, super stereotypical, fundamental ignorance about basic scientific common sense anything. We would have debates about issues for theology class sometimes. I put debates in quotes. Because it was essentially rigged so that the right side would win. They made us do all sorts of ducked up stuff. Too. Like. My class 1 year, junior in HS, had to do a retreat for a younger class, freshmen and sophomores, basically telling them that if they kissed dated they were sleuths. They made us stand in front of PPs with those disgusting anti-abortion signs in a downtown area, something I'm still ashamed I was forced to participate in. I was naively pro-life at the time. But even then, I knew what we were doing was gross. Eventually, things spiraled out of control there to the point where the principal, for seemingly little to no reason, made it his life's mission to try and destroy mine. I can write more if people are interested. My ex-boyfriend ran a cult. He enjoyed bending people to his will. He was very charismatic and passionate and it was easy to follow him. I wasted 6 years of my life with him. I was a member of the Worldwide Church of God in the 90s and loved it. It was like the loving family I had always wanted. I only left because I started reading books by Krishnamurti. My eyes were opened and I couldn't live a lie after that. I miss my cult friends and think of them now and then. I just wanted people to know that not all cult members are miserable zombies. My time to shine. I left the whole thing years ago. But this year my parents decided I wasn't religious enough, so we went on this trip to go visit the city the cult and centered in. So when we got to the mosque, there was this huge line that we had to wait in 4 hours. It got dark fast. And a thunderstorm began. At the same time, from the line you could literally see hundreds of crows perched on the roof of the mosque. We finally got to the front of the line and had to bow and pray towards the bones of these dead religious guys. It was a weird time. I grew up in the Unification Church, aka the Moonies. My parents joined and I was born into it. Tons of weird stuff still happens there. But hands down the creepiest thing I witnessed is as follows. At one point in the late 90s early 2000s the church leadership wanted to collect the blood of the members for some sort of spiritual condition. The church is obsessed with blood lineage for a variety of reasons. I turned up to this blood drive. Walked into the room. And there were about 5 huge industrial-sized cooking pots on the tables in the room. They then drew my blood, using sterile equipment. Thankfully, and immediately emptied the syringe into one of the pots. Then I looked in the pot and realized, the pots were full of the commingled blood of many different people. I have no idea what happened to the blood afterwards. This is not what made me leave. I was already on my way out at this point. The real nail in the coffin for me was learning of the cult leader's illegitimate children despite his assertion that sex outside of marriage is the worst sin imaginable.